Section 2, Book 1, Part 2 of the Histories, by Publius Cornelius Tacitus. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Andrew Coleman. The Histories by Publius Cornelius Tacitus, translated by Alfred John Church and William Jackson Brodribb. Book 1, January to March A.D. 69, Part 2. Then followed Galba's speech in the Senate, which was as plain and brief as his speech to the soldiery. Piso delivered a graceful oration, and was supported by the feeling of the Senate. Many who wished him well spoke with enthusiasm; those who had opposed him, in moderate terms. The majority met him with an officious homage, having aims of their own, and no thought for the state. Piso neither said, nor did, anything else in public in the following 4 days which intervened between his adoption and his death. As tidings of the mutiny in Germany were arriving with daily increasing frequency, while the country was ready to receive and to credit all intelligence that had an unfavourable character, the Senate came to a resolution to send deputies to the German armies. It was privately discussed whether Piso should go with them to give them a more imposing appearance. They, it was said, would bring with them the authority of the Senate, he the majesty of the Caesar. It was thought expedient to send with them Cornelius Laco, prefect of the Praetorian Guard, but he thwarted the design. In nominating, excusing, and changing the deputies, the Senate having entrusted the selection to Galba, the Emperor showed a disgraceful want of firmness, yielding to individuals who made interest to stay or to go, as their fears or their hopes prompted. Next came the question of money. On a general inquiry, it seemed the fairest course to demand restitution from those who had caused the public poverty. Nero had squandered in presents 2,200 million sesterces. It was ordered that each recipient should be sued, but should be permitted to retain a 10th part of the bounty. They had, however, barely a 10th part left, having wasted the property of others in the same extravagancies in which they had squandered their own, till the most rapacious and profligate among them had neither capital nor land remaining, nothing in fact but the appliances of their vices. 30 Roman knights were appointed to conduct the process of recovery, a novel office, and made burdensome by the number and intriguing practices of those with whom it had to deal. Everywhere were sales and brokers, and Rome was in an uproar with auctions. Yet great was the joy to think that the men whom Nero had enriched would be as poor as those whom he had robbed. About this time were cashiered 2 tribunes of the Praetorian Guard, Antonius Taurus and Antonius Naso, an officer of the city cohorts, Aemilius Pecensis, and one of the watch, Julius Fronto. This led to no amendment with the rest, but only started the apprehension that a crafty and timid policy was getting rid of individuals, while all were suspected. Otho, meanwhile, who had nothing to hope while the state was tranquil, and whose whole plans depended on revolution, was being roused to action by a combination of many motives: by a luxury that would have embarrassed even an emperor, by a poverty that a subject could hardly endure, by his rage against Galba, by his envy of Piso. He even pretended to fear to make himself keener in desire. "I was," said he, "too formidable to Nero, and I must not look for another Lusitania, another honourable exile. Rulers always suspect and hate the man who has been named for the succession. This has injured me with the aged emperor, and will injure me yet more with a young man whose temper, naturally savage, has been rendered ferocious by prolonged exile. How easy to put Otho to death! I must therefore do and dare now, while Galba's authority is still unsettled, and before that of Piso is consolidated. Periods of transition suit great attempts, and delay is useless where inaction is more hurtful than temerity. Death, which nature ordains for all alike, yet admits of the distinction of being either forgotten or remembered with honour by posterity, and, if the same lot awaits the innocent and the guilty, the man of spirit will at least deserve his fate. The soul of Otho was not effeminate like his person. His confidential freedmen and slaves, who enjoyed a licence unknown in private families, brought the debaucheries of Nero's court, its intrigues, its easy marriages, and the other indulgences of despotic power, before a mind passionately fond of such things, dwelt upon them as his if he dared to seize them, and reproached the inaction that would leave them to others. The astrologers also urged him to action, predicting from their observation of the heavens revolutions and a year of glory for Otho. This is a class of men whom the powerful cannot trust, and who deceive the aspiring, a class which will always be proscribed in this country, and yet always retained. Many of these men were attached to the secret councils of Poppæa, and were the vilest tools in the employ of the imperial household. One of them, Ptolemæus, had attended Otho in Spain, and had there foretold that his patron would survive Nero. Gaining credit by the result, and arguing from his own conjectures, and from the common talk of those who compared Galba's age with Otho's youth, he had persuaded the latter that he would be called to the throne. Otho, however, received the prediction as the words of wisdom and the intimation of destiny, with that inclination so natural to the human mind, readily to believe in the mysterious. Nor did Ptolemæus fail to play his part. He now even prompted to crime, to which from such witches it is easy to pass. Whether indeed these thoughts of crime were suddenly conceived is doubtful. Otho had long been courting the affections of the soldiery, either in the hope of succeeding to the throne, or in preparation for some desperate act. On the march, on parade, and in their quarters, he would address all the oldest soldiers by name, and in allusion to the progresses of Nero, would call them his messmates. Some he would recognize, he would inquire after others, and would help them with his money and interest. He would often intersperse his conversation with complaints and insinuations against Galba, and anything else that might excite the vulgar mind. Laborious marches, a scanty commissariat, and the rigour of military discipline were especially distasteful, when men, accustomed to sail to the lakes of Campania and the cities of Greece, had painfully to struggle under the weight of their arms over the Pyrenees, the Alps, and vast distances of road. The minds of the soldiery were already on fire when Maevius Pudens, a near relative of Tigellinus, added, so to speak, fuel to the flames. In his endeavour to win over all who were particularly weak in character, or who wanted money and were ready to plunge into revolution, he gradually went so far as to distribute, whenever Galba dined with Otho, 100 sesterces to each soldier of the cohort on duty, under pretext of treating them. This, which we may almost call a public bounty, Otho followed up by presents more privately bestowed on individuals. Nay, he bribed with such spirit, that finding there was a dispute between Cocceius Proculus, a soldier of the bodyguard, and one of his neighbours, about some part of their boundaries, he purchased with his own money the neighbour's entire estate, and made a present of it to the soldier. He took advantage of the lazy indifference of the prefect, who overlooked alike notorious facts and secret practices. He then entrusted the conduct of his meditated treason to Onomastus, one of his freedmen, who brought over to his views Barbius Proculus, officer of the watchword to the bodyguard, and Veturius, a deputy centurion in the same force. Having assured himself by various conversations with these men that they were cunning and bold, he loaded them with presents and promises, and furnished them with money with which to tempt the cupidity of others. Thus 2 soldiers from the ranks undertook to transfer the empire of Rome, and actually transferred it. Only a few were admitted to be accomplices in the plot, but they worked by various devices on the wavering minds of the remainder. On the more distinguished soldiers, by hinting that the favours of Nymphidius had subjected them to suspicion. On the vulgar herd, by the anger and despair with which the repeated postponement of the donative had inspired them. Some were fired by their recollections of Nero, and their longing regrets for their old licence. All felt a common alarm at the idea of having to serve elsewhere. The contagion spread to the legions and the auxiliary troops, already excited by the news of the wavering loyalty of the army of Germany. So ripe were the disaffected for mutiny, and so close the secrecy preserved by the loyal, that they would actually have seized Otho on the 14th of January, as he was returning from dinner, had they not been deterred by the risks of darkness, the inconvenient dispersion of the troops over the whole city, and the difficulty of concerted action among a half-intoxicated crowd. It was no care for the state, which they deliberately meditated polluting with the blood of their emperor. It was a fear lest in the darkness of night any one who presented himself to the soldiers of the Pannonian or German army might be fixed on instead of Otho, whom few of them knew. Many symptoms of the approaching outburst were repressed by those who were in the secret. Some hints which had reached Galba's ears were turned into ridicule by Laco the prefect, who knew nothing of the temper of the soldiery, and who, inimical to all measures, however excellent, which he did not originate, obstinately thwarted men wiser than himself. On the 15th of January, as Galba was sacrificing in front of the temple of Apollo, the Haruspex and Bricius announced to him that the entrails had a sinister aspect, that treachery threatened him, that he had an enemy at home. Otho heard, for he had taken his place close by, and interpreted it by contraries in a favourable sense, as promising success to his designs. Not long after, his freedman Onomastus informed him that the architect and the contractors were waiting for him. It had been arranged thus to indicate that the soldiers were assembling, and that the preparations of the conspiracy were complete. To those who inquired the reason of his departure, Otho pretended that he was purchasing certain farm buildings, which from their age he suspected to be unsound, and which had therefore to be first surveyed. Leaning on his freedman's arm, he proceeded through the palace of Tiberius to the Velabrum, and thence to the golden milestone near the temple of Saturn. There 23 soldiers of the bodyguard saluted him as emperor, and while he trembled at their scanty number, put him hastily into a chair, drew their swords, and hurried him onwards. About as many more soldiers joined them on their way, some because they were in the plot, many from mere surprise. Some shouted and brandished their swords, others proceeded in silence, intending to let the issue determine their sentiments. Julius Martialis was the tribune on guard in the camp. Appalled by the enormity and suddenness of the crime, or perhaps fearing that the troops were very extensively corrupted, and that it would be destruction to oppose them, he made many suspect him of complicity. The rest of the tribunes and centurions preferred immediate safety to danger and duty. Such was the temper of men's minds, that while there were few to venture on so atrocious a treason, many wished it done, and all were ready to acquiesce. Meanwhile, the unconscious Galba, busy with his sacrifice, was importuning the gods of an empire that was now another's. A rumour reached him that some senator unknown was being hurried into the camp. Before long it was affirmed that this senator was Otho. At the same time came messengers from all parts of the city, where they had chanced to meet the procession, some exaggerating the danger, some who could not even then forget to flatter, representing it as less than the reality. On deliberation, it was determined to sound the feeling of the cohort on guard in the palace, but not through Galba in person, whose authority was to be kept unimpaired to meet greater emergencies. They were accordingly collected before the steps of the palace, and Piso addressed them as follows: "Comrades, this is the 6th day since I became a Caesar by adoption, not knowing what was to happen, whether this title was to be desired or dreaded. It rests with you to determine what will be the result to my family and to the state. It is not that I dread on my own account the gloomier issue, for I have known adversity, and I am learning at this very moment that prosperity is fully as dangerous. It is the lot of my father, of the Senate, of the empire itself, that I deplore, if we have either to fall this day, or to do what is equally abhorrent to the good, to put others to death. In the late troubles we had this consolation, a capital unstained by bloodshed, and power transferred without strife. It was thought that by my adoption provision was made against the possibility of war, even after Galba's death. I will lay no claim to nobleness or moderation, for indeed to count up virtues in comparing oneself with Otho is needless. The vices of which alone he boasts overthrew the empire, even when he was but the emperor's friend. Shall he earn that empire now by his manner and his gait, or by those womanish adornments? They are deceived, on whom luxury imposes by its false show of liberality. He will know how to squander, he will not know how to give. Already he is thinking of debaucheries, of revels, of tribes of mistresses. These things he holds to be the prizes of princely power, things in which the wanton enjoyment will be for him alone, the shame and the disgrace for all. Never yet has any one exercised for good ends the power obtained by crime. The unanimous will of mankind gave to Galba the title of Caesar, and you consented when he gave it to me. Were the Senate, the country, the people, but empty names, yet, comrades, it is your interest that the most worthless of men should not create an emperor. We have occasionally heard of legions mutinying against their generals, but your loyalty, your character, stand unimpeached up to this time. Even with Nero, it was he that deserted you, not you that deserted him. Shall less than 30 runaways and deserters, whom no one would allow to choose a tribune or centurion for themselves, assign the empire at their pleasure? Do you tolerate the precedent? Do you, by your inaction, make the crime your own? This lawless spirit will pass into the provinces, and though we shall suffer from this treason, you will suffer from the wars that will follow. Again, no more is offered you for murdering your prince than you will have if you shun such guilt. We shall give you a donative for your loyalty, as surely as others can give it for your treason." The soldiers of the bodyguard dispersed, but the rest of the cohort, who showed no disrespect to the speaker, displayed their standards, acting, as often happens in a disturbance, on mere impulse and without any settled plan, rather than, as was afterwards believed, with treachery and an intention to deceive. Celsus Marius was sent to the picked troops from the army of Illyricum, then encamped in the portico of Vipsanius. Instructions were also given to Amulius Serenus and Quintius Sabinus, centurions of the first rank, to bring up the German soldiers from the Hall of Liberty. No confidence was placed in the legion levied from the fleet, which had been enraged by the massacre of their comrades, whom Galba had slaughtered immediately on his entry into the capital. Meanwhile, Cetrius Severus, Subrius Dexter, and Pompeius Longinus, all three military tribunes, proceeded to the praetorian camp, in the hope that a sedition, which was but just commencing and not yet fully matured, might be swayed by better counsels. Two of these tribunes, Subrius and Cetrius, the soldiers assailed with menaces. Longinus they seized and disarmed. It was not his rank as an officer, but his friendship with Galba, that bound him to that prince, and roused a stronger suspicion in the mutineers. The legion levied from the fleet joined the praetorians without any hesitation. The Illyrian detachments drove Celsus away with a shower of javelins. The German veterans wavered long. Their frames were still enfeebled by sickness, and their minds were favourably disposed towards Galba, who, finding them exhausted by their long return voyage from Alexandria, whither they had been sent on by Nero, had supplied their wants with a most unsparing attention. The whole populace, and the slaves with them, were now crowding the palace, clamouring with discordant shouts for the death of Otho and the destruction of the conspirators, just as if they were demanding some spectacle in the circus or amphitheatre. They had not indeed any discrimination or sincerity, for on that same day they would raise with equal zeal a wholly different cry. It was their traditional custom to flatter any ruler with reckless applause and meaningless zeal. Meanwhile, two suggestions were keeping Galba in doubt. Titus Vinius thought that he should remain within the palace, array the slaves against the foe, secure the approaches, and not go out to the enraged soldiers. "You should," he said, "give the disaffected time to repent, the loyal time to unite, crimes gained by hasty action, better counsels by delay. At all events, you will still have the same facilities of going out, if need be; whereas your retreat, should you repent of having gone, will be in the power of another." The rest were for speedy action. "Before," they said, "the yet feeble treason of this handful of men can gather strength, Otho himself will be alarmed, Otho, who stole away to be introduced to a few strangers, but who now, thanks to the hesitation and inaction in which we waste our time, is learning how to play the prince. We must not wait till, having arranged matters in the camp, he bursts into the forum, and under Galba's very eyes makes his way to the Capitol, while our noble emperor with his brave friends barricades the doors of his palace. We are to stand a siege forsooth, and truly we shall have an admirable resource in the slaves, if the unanimous feeling of this vast multitude, and that which can do so much, the first burst of indignation, be suffered to subside. Moreover, that cannot be safe which is not honourable. If we must fall, let us go to meet the danger. This will bring more odium upon Otho, and will be more becoming to ourselves." Vinius opposing this advice, Laco assailed him with threats, encouraged by Icelus, who persisted in his private animosities, to the public ruin. Without further delay, Galba sided with these more plausible advisers. Piso was sent on into the camp, as being a young man of noble name, whose popularity was of recent date, and who was a bitter enemy to Titus Vinius; that is, either he was so in reality, or these angry partisans would have it so, and belief in hatred is but too ready. Piso had hardly gone forth, when there came a rumour, at first vague and wanting confirmation, that Otho had been slain in the camp. Soon, as happens with these great fictions, men asserted that they had been present and had seen the deed; and between the delight of some and the indifference of others, the report was easily believed. Many thought the rumour had been invented and circulated by the Othonianists, who were now mingling with the crowd, and who disseminated these false tidings of success to draw Galba out of the palace. Upon this, not only did the people and the ignorant rabble break out into applause and vehement expressions of zeal, but many of the knights and senators, losing their caution as they laid aside their fear, burst open the doors of the palace, rushed in, and displayed themselves to Galba, complaining that their revenge had been snatched from them. The most arrant coward, the man who, as the event proved, would dare nothing in the moment of danger, was the most voluble and fierce of speech. No one knew anything, yet all were confident in assertion, till at length Galba, in the dearth of all true intelligence, and overborne by the universal delusion, assumed his cuirass, and as, from age and bodily weakness, he could not stand up against the crowd that was still rushing in, he was elevated on a chair. He was met in the palace by Julius Atticus, a soldier of the bodyguard, who, displaying a bloody sword, cried, "I have slain Otho!" "Comrade," replied Galba, "who gave the order?" So singularly resolute was his spirit in curbing the license of the soldiery, threats did not dismay him, nor flatteries seduce. End of Book 1, Part 2. Recording by Andrew Coleman.